All right, so the next thing we need to do is start to work on the spine and neck. Now, what we have to do first before we do anything else is make sure that all our joints in the spine and neck bend the same way when we rotate them. So I'm going to select spine 1, I'm going to hold on shift, and I'm going to select all the way to the head. So make sure you have spine 1 all the way to the head selected. I'm going to get my rotate tool, and if I rotate it in one axis, I'm picking the Z axis, which is this one. You'll see that my character bends all kinds of different directions, and I don't want that. I want to do the Z axis or whatever bending axis it is and have him bend forward. Right now, if I go the Y axis, I get some weird things going on. So that's because our orientations are not the same for all those joints. So if I get my move tool and making sure, if I double click my move tool and make sure that my axis orientation is set to object mode, it's very important that your axis orientation is set to object mode, otherwise you will not be able to see what's going on here. With it set to object mode, if I select spine 1 and I press down, you can see that I go up and my spine 1, spine 2, spine 3, they're all aligned the same way. Spine 4 is aligned the same way. The green axis is out the side, the Z axis is forward, no, the X axis is pointing up. But when I go to neck 1, you see that my green axis, my Y axis, is pointing out the back. So there's a discrepancy there. So I need to make all of these consistent. To do that, I need to reorient them. But if I reorient spine 1 as it is, because it's the parent joint that's sitting at the top of the stack here, it's going to reorient everything. And I don't want to do that. I just want to do the spine and neck. So I have to separate the joints that I don't want to reorient from the spine. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to start by selecting the pelvis joint, which is down here. I'm going to hit Shift P. That's going to unparent it from the spine. If I undo that and do it again, you can see that we have a connection to spine 1 right here. That's what this little triangle thing is. If I hit Shift P, you'll see that that disappears. Now there's a gap. We don't have a connection. Then we need to select our eye center joints, this one and this one. And if you're doing the trash can robot, you just have one. I'm going to hit Shift P and you'll see that those disconnect as well. And then I'm going to select the two shoulders. Again, in the viewport, click on one, then shift click the other and Shift P, and that's going to separate that. So now when I click on spine 1, you can see that all it selects is all this stuff here. Okay, so what I need to then do is do a joint orientation. So skeleton, orient joint, go in the options. And what we want is X, Y, X, and a minus in here. And when I hit apply, oh, and if you get this error, it says cannot perform, and I don't think you can see it, but there's an error that says cannot perform joint orientation because there's non-zero rotations, and that's because of my eyebrows here. So for my eyebrows, those are parented under the skull joint. So here, the eyebrows group right here, I can just select the eyebrows group and Shift P to unparent, and then select my spine 1 again, and then run this, and I shouldn't have a problem. Now, if I, with spine 1 selected, if I hit down, you can see that my axes are staying the same all the way up the chain. Okay, and we're not worried about the skull. We're just worried about the 4 spine joints and the 2 neck joints and the head joint. Okay, so now we're good. We can close this window, and if I again select spine 1, hold on shift and select all the way to the head, and then get my rotate tool, and then I rotate on this axis, you see that I bend forward as I expected. If I rotate on this axis, I bend sideways. I'm not getting weird rotations anymore. So it's very important that you get your orientations done correctly. Okay, so there we go. And after you do your testing, make sure you undo all that stuff that all those rotations you put in there. So let's reconnect everything. So I'm going to take my 2 shoulders and then shift select spine 4 and hit P, and those will reconnect. I'm going to select the pelvis joint, which is that one, shift select spine 1 and hit P, and it reconnects. And then I need to take my eyebrows group and again just middle mouse drag it to the skull like that, And then I need to take my two left eye centers and middle mouse drag those to the, let's open up, yeah, there it is, eye base. So middle mouse drag those onto eye base, and now we're reconnected. So again, if I select spine 1 all the way to head and rotate, I get the character bending forward and backward like that, or side to side. Perfect. So that's what we need to do to make sure that we are oriented. If you don't do this step, when you go to bend your character, he's going to bend different ways, and it's going to cause you problems. Okay. Now, the way that the spine bends is going to be determined also by the rotation order. Remember that if you select a joint and open the attribute editor, you can see that we have a rotate order here, and the default is X, Y, Z. The way that Maya rotations are calculated, they're calculated by the last axis first, then the middle one, then the first one. So Z is calculated first, Y is calculated second, and X is calculated last. The most important axis for your joint is the one that should be at the end. So in this case, the axis that makes the spine bend forward and backward is the green one, which is the Y axis. That's the one that makes it bend forward and backward. So we need the Y to be at the end. The next important axis is the twisting axis, which is this one here, which is the X axis. So we need X to be in the middle. That will leave Z as the first. So the rotate order that we want is Z, X, Y. Okay, ZXY is the correct rotation order. So we have to do these one by one. Unfortunately, Maya won't let us select them all and do them. So just going to click on spine 1, go to ZXY. Okay, press down on the keyboard to go to spine 2, ZXY. Let me just make sure that I have. ZXY, click on spine 2. We can just go right here, click on spine 2. It's set to ZXY. Go to spine 3. ZXY, go to spine 4. ZXY, neck 1. ZXY, neck 2. ZXY, and the head we want to be ZXY. Okay, so make sure you get that for all of them. So I'm just going to check them. I'm going to select spine 1 and hit down and keep hitting down, and I'm watching my rotate order as I navigate through all of these, and they're all set to ZXY. That is good. Okay, so moving on. Spine controls. So we need a control just like we have foot control and knee controls. We need a spine control. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to make a curved NURB circle. So click on that. We're going to get a little circle down there. I'm going to just make it bigger, and then I'm going to get my move tool, and I'm going to hold middle mouse button with V. I'm going to hold down V and then middle mouse drag this to my spine 1 joint. Okay, and make it a decent size. You might want to show your robot so that you can tell just how big this control is. So I'm going to maybe do that. Then I can hide my robot again. We're going to name this control COG, which is short for center of gravity. Okay, that's the COG. I'm going to freeze transformations, so modify, freeze transformations. Let's do that again. Freeze transformations. There we go. And now I'm going to delete this history. See, I got a little bit of history here. So I'm going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. Or you can, in the poly modeling, you have the delete history there and a freeze transformations there and a delete history right there. Okay, so you can then, if you want, you can edit the shape of this control. And if you're going to do that, you want to do it before you delete history. In the Make NURB Circle, you can set the sections to whatever you want. So if you can go to like 16 sections, and you can right click on it, go to Control Vertex, and you can move points around. So if I select every other point on it, then I can use this to shape it however I want. So you can do whatever you want there. It's not important whether it has a shape or not. I mean, it helps with the animators to be able to see what they're doing, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. So I'm just going to leave that one as is. Again, transformations and history have been deleted. I'm going to duplicate this. So with it selected, hit Control D, I'm going to snap this to the spine 2 joint, so the joint straight above. So hold down V and middle mouse drag that up there. I'm going to maybe scale it down so it's not so big. Okay, and then again, freeze transformations on it. Okay, and this one is going to be called spine control. So spine CTRL. Okay, and if we want, we can then also color code these. So again, we can enable overrides, and what do we say? Yellow for these ones. So let's go find that yellow and that yellow right there. Okay, so you can see there that color. Let's see here. So we need to make little buffer groups for these, and I'll talk about why we use buffers as we get further along. You'll see why we do that. Okay, so deselect everything, then hit Control G, and then hit Control D to duplicate that group. So the first one is going to be the cog buffer. So COG_BUFFER, and the second one is going to be spine control _ buffer, just like that. Okay. The cog buffer, the pivot point again is way down here, so we need to hold down D and or just hold down V and middle mouse drag it to where the spine 1 joint is. And spine control buffer, hold down V and middle mouse drag that to where the spine control or I'm sorry, spine 2 joint is. And select both those groups and freeze their transformation so that they get zeroed out. Okay, so buffers, basically the way this happens is if you look at the orientations of this, I have the spinal control buffer selected. You look at the orientations. Okay, Y is up, Z is forward, and X is out the side. But if we look at the spine 2 joint, you'll see that X is up, Y is out this side, and Z is still forward. So obviously these things do not match up. They're not aligned the same. So if we need to align our control to the joint, the control is going to get rotated funny, because the way that it has to happen, if you look at the joint, our y-axis is going out the side here, and our x-axis is going up. But with our control, x-axis is this way. So what would happen is that this would get rotated 90 degrees this way. Now obviously we don't want our control looking like that. And if we freeze transformations, it's going to reset my axes. Okay, so what I need to do is do that to the buffer instead of the control, so that the buffer will get all those numbers put on it, and it will hold it. The buffer, it doesn't matter what's happening with the buffer, because the buffers know what the animator is playing with. The animator is going to be playing with the actual controls, and those controls need to be clean. Remember, I can't have a 90-degree rotation in my Z to start off with. I got to zero everything out. You'll see that with that 90-degree rotation, I'm aligned. My X is going up, my Y is out the side, just like the joint. If I select the joint and go back and forth between the two, you can see that they're aligned. But as soon as I try to get rid of this number right here by freezing transformations, you'll see that my axes went back to what they were before. So that's not the way that we want to do it. So I'm going to zero this out, and that's going to. And then obviously I don't want my control upright like that. I want it to be laying flat like it is right here. Okay, so the buffer is there to hold on to those dirty values, that 90-degree rotation. We're going to put that on the buffer so that the control can maintain its perfectly clean channels, right? And then we're going to parent the control under the buffer. And what that does for us is that the child will always take on the orientation of the parent. So if the buffer has been oriented correctly to match up with the spine, when I put the control as a child of that buffer and then freeze transformations on it, its axes are going to be aligned like that of the parent, which also happens to be the same alignment as the joint. So things will be matched up perfectly and will allow us to control the joint the right way. Okay, so that's what we're going to have to do. So what happens is, if I try to control this spine 1 joint with this control right now, this is what's going to happen. So if I select spine the cog here, and I select spine 1 and go to constrain and orient. I'm going to go in the options and just reset it to make sure that I'm at default setting. If I hit add, look at what happens there. My character gets rotated 90 degrees. That's because my axes were not lined up the way that they needed to be, which is why we have to do the whole thing with the buffers. Obviously, this is not going to work. We don't want to have to start out with our character bent 90 degrees in the wrong direction. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, so what we need to do is do that to the buffer. So we have a cog buffer right here, and it's sitting in the same spot as the cog itself. You can see that the axes are in the same place. So I'm going to select spine 1, then select the cog buffer by control clicking on it. I'm going to do a constrain, and I'm going to do an orient. Now, if I select my cog buffer, you'll see that I have a 90-degree rotation in rotate Z. And that's okay, because that buffer is not going to be ever seen by the animator, and it's going to hold the values. But you'll see that my axes now are aligned the same between the cog buffer and spine 1. So that's what I want. If you open up the cog buffer, you'll see that my orient constraint is right there. I don't need that anymore, so I can delete it, and it's just going to leave me with these values in here. So my buffer has been rotated to line it up perfectly with the joint. And then if I take my cog control and middle mouse and drag it onto the buffer to make it a child, and then freeze transformate, watch what happens when I freeze transformation. So I freeze it, you'll see that my my axes now align perfectly with that joint. So if we do what I tried to do before, which is select the cog and then shift select spine 1 and do a constrain orient, nothing bends over. It doesn't flip 90 degrees, and now I can actually control. By rotating the cog, I can actually control my character. Okay, so that buffer is just there to hold that 90-degree rotation so that it's not put on the actual control. It's put on this buffer node. It just absorbs those values so that they don't have to be put on the control. Okay, so that is why we use the buffers. So we got to do the same thing for the spine control buffer. So I'm going to select spine 2, the joint spine 2. Control click my spine control buffer, go to constrain orient, which is going to put a 90-degree rotation on the spine control buffer. I'm going to open it up and delete this constraint because I don't need that constraint anymore. I've just oriented the thing, and now I don't need the constraint. Then I'm going to middle mouse spine control onto the spine control buffer, and I'm going to freeze transformations on it, and now my spine control is also aligned. Okay, and now we select the control, shift select the joint, constrain, orient. There's no movement, and if I take my spine control and rotate it, you'll see that it actually rotates my spine. Okay, so next thing that we have to do is, because we want, when I rotate my cog here, I want the spine control to go with it. Right now it's not doing that. So the way that we fix that is we're going to take spine control buffer and parent it under the cog. So I'm going to drag it under the cog so we have this relationship here. Now when I rotate my cog, you'll see that the spine control goes with it. Okay, so that is what we have right there. Okay, so if I select them both and I can rotate this guy forward, or backward, or whatever it is. So that's working. Okay, now that we have that set up, we're going to take the cog buffer and drag it into the controls group. So every time you finish making a control, you drag it into the controls group so that it will then go with the character. So if I rotate the character, you'll see that my cog and my spine control are moving. If I move everything, it all goes together, nothing gets left behind. And if I scale everything, it all scales up and down as expected. All right. So we need to finish up the spine here. So with the spine control, it's only right now affecting the spine 2 joints. Spine 3 and 4 have no rotations on them. So we need to attach the rotation of the spine control to spine 3 and 4, because we already have it controlling spine 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Windows, General Editors, and we're going to look for the Connection Editor. Okay, if you click that, you get this window here. First thing I'm going to do in this window, right now you're seeing all the attributes associated with spine control because that's what I had selected when I opened this window. And you can see that there's a lot of different attributes. You're never going to use most of this stuff. We don't need to see it. So I'm going to go to left display, and I'm going to uncheck show non-keyable, which drastically reduces the length of that list. And I'm going to go to right display and do the same thing. Okay, so on this side, I want the spine control. And then over here, I'm going to select spine 3 and click spine 4 and go to reload right so that I can load those up in there, spine 3 and spine 4. I'm going to select the rotate for the spine control, and I'm going to tell it to control the rotate for spine 3 and the rotate for spine 4. So basically, whatever is in the left side that you selected, you can then tell it what to control on this side. So if I wanted to control if I want the rotations that happen on the spine control to also happen to spine 3 and 4, I can just connect them that way. Okay, so now they're connected. By simply clicking on it, you can disconnect it, and you click on it, you'll reconnect. Okay, so let's see what happens if I take my spine control and rotate it. You can see spine 3 and 4 are getting rotations as well. Okay, I have rotated my spine control 30.629 degrees. If I look at spine 3, it's got 30.629 degrees in Y, and again 30.629 degrees in Y on spine 4. So then I can zero this out and straighten my spine back up. Okay, make sure you test all this stuff before you move on to the next thing. Okay, so we have our cog here, and you can bend the character over at the waist. Problem is, I don't really have any control over the hips, because right now the cog controls the hips, but when I rotate the cog, it also controls the upper body. So I want to make my a hip control that's going to control the hips sort of individually. Okay, so that I have this sort of independent hips that I can do. So again, I'm going to make a circle. There it is up there. I'm going to drag it up here, and I'm going to snap it to the spine 1 joint. So hold down V and middle mouse drag that to spine 1. I'm going to make it bigger. And this time, just to make it a little different, I'm going to click on my inputs here. And under degree, I'm going to set this to linear, and you'll see that this sort of takes on a linear shape. Okay, and then you can tell it how many sections. If I do 4, it'll turn into a box. If I do, so it'll turn into a square. If I do, 5, it'll turn into a pentagon. So you can make whatever shape you want. I'm going to probably just stick with 8. Okay, and again, you'll want to make sure you freeze transformations and delete history when you're done. Okay, and we're going to call this hip control. So hip CTRL hip control. Okay, so make it smaller there so that it fits inside of the main cog here. So I moved its I snapped it to the spine 1 joint, but now I want to move its pivot to the pelvis. I'm going to hold down D and V and just snap the pelvis down. Snap the pivot down at the pelvis. And then we can color code this, and I'm probably going to make this one a different color just so that it doesn't get lost in these other ones. So let's see, what color can we make it? I don't know. Let's pick a green maybe. It's kind of dull. How about a blue? Now, you want to pick a color that's easy to see. How about, let's go with white. There we go. That pops a little bit. So we'll go with white. So I'm going to deselect everything. Just click outside and deselect everything. I'm going to hit Control G to make a new empty group. I'm going to call this hip control underscore buffer. And again, this is the same thing we did with the other ones. Okay. And I'm going to snap it to the pelvis. So get my move tool and hold down V and snap that group to the pelvis. Freeze transformations on it. Okay. And we need to align it to the pelvis. So I'm going to select my pelvis here. Control click my hip control buffer in the outliner. And I'm going to go to constrain, orient, which is going to orient it, open it up, and delete that constraint like we did before. So now my hip control buffer again has a 90-degree rotation in it. That is not going to be transferred to the control. It's going to stay in the buffer. Okay, and then I'm going to take my hip control and drag it under the buffer, and then freeze its transformations, and now it is aligned as well. Okay, so now with my hip control selected, I can select your hip control, and you can select your pelvis, shift selected in the viewport, or control click it in the outliner. And we're going to go to constrain and orient. Okay, and then I'm going to parent my hip control buffer under the cog, which is in here. So I'm going to take my hip control buffer and parent it under my cog right there. So now when I rotate the hip control, you see that I can independently rotate my hips without affecting the upper body at all. And that is still, I'm able to do that by selecting the cog. So I've now created a sort of an independent hip control. Okay, so test it and then make sure you zero everything back out and then save your work. Don't forget to save. You don't want to have to redo all this stuff. Okay, so that is the sort of spine controls there. Now we can do the neck controls. So again, I'm going to make a new circle. I'm going to get my move tool and middle mouse drag that to snap it there. I'm going to show my robot again, because again, I want my controls to be easily reachable. Because, for example, if my control was sort of buried in the body like this, you see how now I can't really get to it. So you want to make sure that these things are accessible. And if you have to move it up, that's fine. I'm going to hide my robot again, so if I'm happy that position, but you'll see that my pivot point is no longer at the neck 1 joint, so I can just hold down D and V and snap the pivot down there. Okay, control D to duplicate this control and snap this one to neck 2. Okay, now we have 2 neck joints. So this one here is neck 1 control. And this one here is neck 2 control. Okay, and again, we need to freeze transformations, delete history on them so that they're nicely zeroed out. Okay, deselect everything. Hit Control G to make an empty group. Hit Control D to duplicate it. So I'm just going to copy the name here. So this one is neck 1 control buffer. And I'm just copying and pasting to make things faster here. This one is neck 2 control buffer. Okay, so these are now our buffers for the neck controls. Again, same reason that we did them before, just so that they hold those values so that they don't get transferred to the controls. Okay, now we need to align those buffers to the neck 1 control. We need to again get our move tool and hold down V and middle mouse snap it to the neck 1 joint. Neck 2 control buffer, just hold down V and snap that to the neck 2 joint, and then freeze transformations on them. Okay, so there's all these little steps that you have to make sure you remember, otherwise things won't work correctly. When you make the buffers, make sure you snap them to the joints that they need to be at. Okay, so let's see now, what do we have here? Then we need to align those buffers to their joints. So select the neck 1 joint, select neck 1 control buffer, constrain, orient, open up neck 1 control buffer, delete the constraint. You'll see that it has some weird values there. And hold on a sec. Let's do that again. There we go. So there's my neck 1 joint. I'm going to control click my neck 1 buffer, and I'm going to do a constrain, orient, Okay, just like that. Good. I'm going to delete that constraint. Then I'm going to select my neck 2 joint. Control click my neck 2 control buffer. Constrain orient. And let's delete that constraint. Okay, so now those are oriented. I can move the controls under that. So neck 1 control, drag it to neck 1 under neck. Sorry, let's do that again. Get your neck 1 control, middle mouse drag it so that it becomes a child of neck 1 control buffer, and then freeze transformations on it. Do the same for neck 2 control, drag it under the neck 2 control buffer, and freeze transformations on that. Okay. So now that that's done, those should be now perfectly aligned with the joints. So we're going to select neck 1 control, shift select neck 1 joint, constrain orient, select neck 2 control, shift select neck 2 joint, constrain orient. So now when you select neck 2, you'll see that the neck actually moves with it. The problem is if I do neck 1, it gets this motion here because this control is not going with the other one. So what we need to do is take our neck 2 control buffer and parent it under neck 1 control. Okay, so that when we move this now, you'll see that it moves with it and they can rotate, etc., etc. Okay, and then in order to make our so problem is when we rotate here from the cog, you'll see that my controls stay behind. We need them to move along with us. So we need to constrain the neck 1 control buffer to our spine 4 joint. So what we need to do is select spine 4. So the spine 4 joint, control click our neck 1 control buffer. We're going to go to constrain. We're going to go to parent, go in the options, reset the settings just to make sure that we're at default settings, and then hit add. Now when we rotate our cog here, you'll see that those controls are no longer being left behind. Okay, so that pretty much sets up our neck. Only thing we got to do is maybe color correct these. So attribute editor, and then when they enable overrides, and we've been using that yellow, so let's go find that yellow, and there it is for that one, and then for this one as well. So enable overrides, and that yellow is right there. Okay, save your work. All right, so that's the neck done. Now what we want to do is add a little bit of extra functionality in the cog because it works great for rotating, but when you go to move it, you'll see that the skeleton does not move with it. So we need to put that in there. Okay, so we need to point constrain spine 1 to the cog. Okay, so select the cog first, make sure you have the cog selected, then control click spine 1, and we're going to go to constrain, and we're going to go to the point constraint options. Again, reset the settings to make sure that we're going at default settings, and then we will add that constraint there. And once we do that, you can see that now when I move the cog left and right or down, up, whatever, the skeleton goes along for the ride. Okay, so everything should get moved along for the ride. Then I'm going to take my neck 1 control buffer and middle mouse drag it onto the controls group so that it gets put in the rig in the right place. And again, just to test, make sure everything works, and I rotate it, nothing gets left behind. When I scale it, everything scales up uniformly. And of course, when I move it, everything moves with it. So looks like we're good. Okay, next thing we got to do is our head control. So if I show my robot again, and then select my little curve box here, duplicate off a copy, and I'm going to sort of scale this around the head. Want to make a control for the head. You know, something like that, just moving around till it more or less covers the head. I'm going to go in my side view here just so I can shape this, and again, the shape of these things is not really important, but I like to give them a little bit of shape, so maybe something like that. And I don't know, let's maybe try to match the curve this way, so something like that. Okay, make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to, there we go. So something to that effect. That's my head control. So let's name it as such, head control. Okay, and while I'm here, I might as well go ahead and enable the overrides on it and just change its color. So it's yellow. Or whatever color it is that you want. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to hide my robot now that I've shaped my control. When I select this control, you see my pivot point is way up here. It should be right here at the head joint. So I'm going to hold down D and V, middle mouse drag that and snap it to the head joint. And then again, of course, to get rid of all this junk values in here, I'm going to freeze transformations on it. Okay, so make sure you do this. Always remember to freeze those transformations. Okay, so deselect everything. Control G to make an empty group. We're going to call this head control underscore buffer. Okay, and it too needs to be snapped to the head joint, because again, every time you make a group, the default is that the pivot point is at the origin. So with my move tool on, I'm going to hold down V and middle mouse to the head joint there. Okay, and when I do that, I'm going to freeze transformations again. Okay, then just like we've been doing, I'm going to select my head joint, select control, click my head control buffer, constrain, orient, open this up, delete this constraint because now it's aligned, and you can see I got a 90-degree rotation, and this could be any number in the rotates. It's not always going to be 90 degrees in rotate Z. It could be any number in there. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and then what I can do is then get my head control, middle mouse drag it into the buffer, and then freeze its transformation so that it aligns to the joint. Select the head control, shift select the head joint, or if you're going to do it in the outliner, control click the head joint, and then constrain orient. And now you'll see that if I rotate my head control, my head is going to rotate with it. Okay, and then to get that to follow along, when I rotate my neck joint, I should get some rotation. I should get the head control following along, and in order to do that, I need to put this, so if I open up my neck control here and get all the way down to neck 2 control, if I take my head control buffer and middle mouse drag it under the neck 2 control, if I rotate my neck 2 control, you see my head goes with it, which also means that if I move the whole body, you see that my neck control is now moving. My head control is now moving with the body as expected. Okay, save your work when you get to that point. All right. Next thing we got to do is the eye controls. Now, if you're doing the trash can robot, you only need to do a single eye control. But for this guy, because he has 2 eyes, we're going to have multiple controls. So again, start out with a circle, curved circle. I'm going to get my move tool, hold down V and middle mouse drag it to one of the eye center joints. And again, if you're doing the trash can, you just need to do this one time. So, and then I'm going to rotate this. So 90 degrees in X, like that. I'm going to perhaps shrink it down a little bit so it's not too big. If I want, I can show my robot here. Hit 4 for wireframe just to make this control about, a decent size given his eye size. I'm going to hide the robot again. I'm going to select this control, hit Control D to duplicate it, get your move tool, and snap this to the other side. If you're doing the trash can, this is not something you need to do. And again, I can bring back my robot, and this, because this eye is bigger, I can scale this control up a little bit. Okay, just to make it easy for the animator to see which control is for which eye. Okay, then I can hide my robot again. So these are my 2 controls. Right now they're snapped to the eye center joints. I want to select both of them and just move them forward a ways. Doesn't really have to be oh, actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's duplicate one of them. So I'm going to select this guy, Control D to duplicate it, and I'm going to set my translate X value to 0 so that it's centered. And then I'm just going to enlarge this to make it sort of fit over the other two. So something like that. Doesn't really matter, just want to do that. So this one is, let's see, this is my left eye control. So L underscore I CTRL, oops, L underscore I CTRL for control. This one is my right eye control. And this one is my, what do I call this? Eye control master. I CTRL master. So eye control master. Okay, if you're doing the trash can robot, you don't need an eye control master. You just need an eye control. Obviously, you're not going to name it left or right. Just call it eye control, and you're gonna. That's the only control that you need. But because this guy has 2 eyes, I need to make a total of 3 controls. Okay. Then I'm going to take all 3 of these controls, or 1 if you're doing the trash can. I'm going to slide them forward together, just, you know, whatever distance in front of the character so that he's looking straight out. Okay, then I'm going to freeze transformations just so that they 0 out. I'm going to take my left eye control and my right eye control and middle mouse drag them under the eye control master so that if I drag the eye control master, it takes the other 2 with it. So what it is if you want to control both eyes at the same time, you move the animation, the eye control master. And then if you want to rotate, to move a single eye, so if you want one eye to move, you can then select individually which one you want to move. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. If you're doing the trash can robot, obviously that's not a concern, so you'll only have the one control there. Okay, so again, make sure you frozen transformations on the eye controls. So then we can do aim constraints. So what is an aim constraint? An aim constraint is basically a constraint that tells one thing to point at something else no matter where it goes. So as you can imagine, that's a very good setup for the eyes, because what we can do is that we can put an aim constraint on the eye joints so that whenever I move this, they always face their eye controls, right? So no matter where you take this, it's always going to be, those eyes will always be pointed at it. That way you can put this at whatever it is you want your character to be looking at, and the eye lines are going to be correct. Okay, so the way that we set this up, well, let's start by going in the aim constraint option. So constrain, go to aim, go in the options. Okay, so we have an aim vector, so that tells you what axis to aim along. So if the z-axis is forward, you can tell it to aim along the z-axis. The up vector is the up vector of the object being constrained. So in this case, that would be our eye center joint. So the up vector is usually the y-axis, but that depends on the joint. And then the world up vector is the up vector of the actual world itself, which is always the y-axis. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So what do we have to do first is select the target. So I'm going to start with the left eye. So select the target, which is going to be the left eye control. And then select the object to be constrained, which in this case is the left eye center joint. And then hit, so looking at the left eye center joint, you can see that it's pointing forward in X. So if it's pointing forward in X, I want to make sure that my aim vector is set to 1 in X and 0 for the other 2. And you can see that the up vector on that joint is the y-axis. The green one is the y-axis and it's pointing up, so the up vector is 1 in Y. And then of course the world up vector, just looking down here, is up in Y as well. So we hit add, and now this should work. If I select this and move it, you'll see that my joint will follow it no matter where it goes. Let's do the same thing here. Select the right eye control, select the right eye center, constrain, and we'll do an aim. And now it should work. If I select my eye master control, they'll both go along for the ride, as you can see. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward how you do eye constraints. So I'm going to take my eye control master and put it under the controls group. So again, now when I go to move my thing, you'll see that it goes with it. If I rotate it, rotates with it. If I scale it, everything scales together. Okay, so save your work. There we go. So let's clean up the controls a little bit. Okay, we're going to look at the cog. Now the cog needs to be rotated and translated, does not need to be scaled, and you don't need to play with visibility. So we're going to select those, right click, lock and hide selected. Hip control, shift click spine control, shift click neck 1 control, shift click neck 2 control, shift click head control. All we ever do with these is rotate them, so we don't need translate. We don't need scale or visibility. So we're going to right click on those and lock and hide. So you can see that all these controls now just have rotates on them. Okay. The eye master control. And again, if you're doing the trash can, you probably just have one control. Oh, and I forgot to color code these. So let's start with this control here. So I'm going to enable overrides. And I'm going to set these up with the left and right color scheme. So for this one, it's going to be the bright green right there. This one is going to be the bright red, which is right there. And then this is going to be yellow, which is right there. Okay, so we have the good color scheme there. So for the eye master control and the two, so open this up, and the two left and right eye controls, we're going to lock and hide because this only gets translated. So we're going to lock and hide everything other than the translates. So rotate, scale, and this will be lock and hide. And then all the buffers. So I don't think we did these buffers. So head control, neck control, head control buffer, neck 2 control buffer, neck 1 control buffer. We need to lock and hide everything. So select all the attributes, lock and hide. Okay, and just go through and check our hip control buffer, spine control buffer, cog buffer, all lock and hide everything. Okay, so again, that just cleans things up so Animator is not messing around with things that they shouldn't be messing around with. Okay, so that's the eyes. So then the eyebrow controls. Now the trash can robot does not have eyebrows, but he does have a jaw faceplate. So we'll do that after we do the eye control. So I'm going to go in my front view here, and I'm going to bring back my robot just so I can actually see my eyebrows. And I'm going to go to create curve tools, EP curve tool. Now if you go in the options, it should still be set to 1 linear, and that's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on my eyebrow here and just trace around it. So just start drawing a curve around that eyebrow and make it sort of big so that you can select it pretty easily. Okay, so this is going to be my left eyebrow control. Okay, and there it is right there. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to scale it -1 in X to flip it around, and because my eyebrows are not symmetrical, which is not a big deal, what I can do is also center the pivot just so I can move it easily. I'm just going to move it so it lines up over the other eyebrow. And again, don't have to be super exact. And then while I'm here, I'm going to hold down D and V to snap that pivot to that right eyebrow joint. And do the same here. Hold down D and V and middle mouse drag that pivot there. So this one here is the right eyebrow control. Okay, select both these controls and make sure you freeze, transforms, and delete history. Okay. Oh, you know what? And what I forgot to do is that in the side view, as you can see, these controls are not lined up as they should be. So You know, I'm going with both controls selected. I'm going to recenter the pivots, and then I'm going to hide my robot again, just so that it's not getting in the way. Select those two controls, hold down V, and I'm going to snap this so that they're level with those joints. And then I need to select this one, and again, hold down D and V and snap that pivot to the joint. This one, hold down D and V and snap the pivot to the joint right there. And one more time, freeze transformations. Okay. Then all I need to do is do a parent constraint. So select the control, shift select the joint, constrain parent. And if you move the control now, you'll see that the joint goes with it. Do the same thing, select control, shift select joint, constrain parent. So now those should be set up. So right now these don't move with the body. So as you can see, as I move my head, the eyebrow controls stay where they are. So we need to get them so that they move along with everything else. So I'm going to select both of these controls, left eyebrow control, right eyebrow control, and hit Control G to group them to themselves. And we're going to call this group eyebrow controls. Okay. I'm going to take the pivot point, so hold down D and V and snap the pivot to the skull joint. Okay, and then I can take the skull joint and then control click my eyebrow controls group in the outliner, constrain parent. So now when I rotate my head, you'll see that my eyebrows go along for the ride as expected. Okay, so I can take eyebrow controls and middle mouse drag it out into the controls group, so that again, if we rotate, you see that my eyebrow controls go with it. If we scale, they scale up and down, and if we move, they move. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay. Save your work. Okay, so if you should have a jaw joint in there for the trash can robot. If you don't, just make one real quick. I'm just going to click out here and just sort of hold down shift and click up front there just a little bit. Then I'm going to use point snapping in wireframe mode. Hold down V, snap this to there, snap that to there, because that's the center of rotation. Doesn't really matter if this joint is sticking out. And then I'm going to parent that under the skull joint. So shift clicks the skull joint and then hit P to parent that into the whole rig. So the jaw basically is going to be animated like this. Okay, so the way that we do the control is I'm going to make a circle again, and let me hide my, this should be in geometry. Let me hide my robot here. I'm going to select that circle, move tool, point snap to there, rotate it 90 degrees in X, just move it forward, and I'm going to bring back my robot. So this, what I'm going to do is basically just, and again, this is just, you don't need to do it exactly this way if you don't want to, but this I find works well. So I'm going to select the ends of it, just bend it around the face, and select these points and bend those back a little bit more. So something to that effect. You can bend it more or less depending on your preference. Okay, and then let's hide the robot again, and I want to make sure that my pivot point is here at the jaw, so hold down D and V and D and V and snap the pivot point to that jaw joint. Then freeze transformations, delete history. Okay, so this is the jaw pivot joint here. This is the jaw end joint. We're going to call this control the jaw control. Okay, and then we got to look at our joint here. So I'm going to select the control first, shift select my control, and just do a parent constraint, so you can see that now I can rotate the control to make the jaw move. Okay. Select jaw control, hit Control G to group it to itself. Name the group jaw control underscore buffer. Okay, and then we're going to put that in the controls group. Then I'm going to select the control itself. Just make sure you select that. And I'm going to hide everything except rotate X. So I'm going to select all this. Lock and hide, leaving just rotate X. And then on jaw control buffer, I'm going to lock and hide everything. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the jaw control. And we're done with that section.